Welcome, Lee, to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to
Thank
be here.
you. Oh, it's so good to have you here. We're so excited to hear more about you and your book and what brought you here. Let's start first with where in the world are you tuning in from?
I'm in Aspen, Colorado,
Aspen,
and my
Colorado.
yeah, and my actual I'm here in the summer, and my actual home is in Maui, in Hawaii, and so I've got a great life. I spend winters in Maui and summers in Aspen, so I feel
Perfect.
blessed. So blessed.
Perfect.
Yes,
Oh, that's
yes,
some good stuff. I think that's what do they call that? Hashtag goals.
yes.
Yeah, fine. Excellent. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Let's start first, Lee, with, who are you and what brought you to the work that you do today?
Okay. Well, I am an artist and also a relationship counselor, and I teach seminars in conflict resolution. And the seminars have the same name as my book, The Art of Melting Conflict in all relationships. And so actually years ago, I was first an engineer and then a hospital administrator. And uh, and I focused at that time on industrial psychology and setting up seminars to support communication and conflict resolution in the hospital setting. And excuse me, since then, I've been very interested in conflict and how people deal with conflict and how to effectively get our needs met. So,
Mm.
um, anyway, that's been the focus. And I think part of that came from, oh, early on, dealing with when I was a teenager or in college, that my father and I would get into power struggles. And I uh, wanted to learn how to work with that, and how to he was a rageaholic, and how to work with him. And so uh, fortunately, I learned a lot of great tools, and studied quite a bit about that, and he and I became very close friends, and learning how to have good boundaries with him was part of that. And
Hmm.
so anyway, I'll talk more about some of the techniques or ways that I've learned of how to effectively work with conflict.
Excellent. That's extraordinary. So really, Lee, from a young age, you were interested in conflict resolution. It came
Right,
from your father, and some of the rage that he felt at that time, and the ways that you tried to deal with it, but were just not successful. And so you
right,
thought, hey, you know what? I want to learn about this topic.
right, right. Yeah,
Okay. Excellent. Well, that is so exciting. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this. So, if
uh-huh,
we've got people in conflict, then you're the
right.
guy. You're the
Yes,
guy to talk to, whether that be in a romantic relationship, family relationships, really all the relationships across the board. Yeah.
that's correct. Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's jump right into it.
Okay.
What can we learn from Lee?
Well, let's see. Yeah, I think one of the most important things that I've learned is we communicate more with our intention and our energy than our words. And so
Mm.
when we're in a place of fear inside, we're often going to try to control the other person, push against them, and resist them. And so when and part of what's underneath that is we haven't learned how to be with our feelings and process our feelings in an effective way. And so our feelings are scary. And so learning how to deal with that, learning to be self-aware. I check in with myself during the day, and if I'm in the shower or in the car, and I'll just ask myself, how are you feeling, Lee? And if I notice that oh, I'm feeling anxious right now, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling, whatever, sad, whatever may be there, and then I'll attend to that. And so I'll notice where it is I'm feeling it in my body. and I'll breathe into that place and I'll welcome those feelings and allow them to move. And that's the first step is in not trying to get away from the feelings. And, I think the hardest thing is when difficult feelings come up, we subconsciously repress them because we're taught that those feelings are dangerous. And so, like in this technique that I just spoke of, learning how to let the energy of the feelings move. And it's, if we had let's say a 5-year-old child and he came home from school and he said, excuse me, I'm feeling really sad today because one of the kids said that I wasn't okay, or he made fun of me. You wouldn't put duct tape over the child's mouth. You would, say, "Tell me more about that." You would listen and be aware of how the child is feeling. And then you would look at that child, and from the love in your heart, you would reassure that child of what you see. So uh, that's in the same way we check in to be aware of our feelings and learn how to deal with the energy of that first. Okay. And then after that we can uh, explore what's underneath this because our feelings are never about what's going on right now. They always
Hmm.
relate to past events that touch off what's happening now touches off old feelings that are unresolved. And a lot of those feelings relate to our early training, our erroneous beliefs that we were taught about ourselves, beliefs that are not true and not supportive. The major one is that who we are is not okay. And, in studies that they've done with children to see how they're spoken to, what they've seen is that children will receive something on the order of 20 negative pieces of information to every one positive one. And so the way the other kids or our parents or our teachers spoke to us, we got that message. And where they left off, we cultivated our own inner critic that believes that we're not okay. And so when someone says something that may be disrespectful, it may touch into that core sadness around that belief. And and then we react, and our reaction is not just to what they're saying, it's that it resonates in a part of us of what we've been taught and some unresolved feelings within us. So that's
Yeah.
an important awareness to have, you know.
Certainly. And then from there we react with fear, right? We
Right,
react with anger and those feelings that you spoke about,
right.
which then controls the other person and can begin with that energy of conflict.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
way when we're trying to control the other person, it's really an attempt to control our own feelings.
Right.
And so it's a push against the other person that usually has a reaction. And there's lots of ways that we try to control. We'll go into blame and shame, trying to intimidate them, trying to make them feel guilty. We will, oh, uh, call them names. We try to find what their hook is and try to hit that hook in them. We may go into passive aggressiveness where we don't express our anger directly. It's more indirect and passive. Like we don't do the job, but we don't do it well. We
Right.
don't fully show up. We um, make agreements and then break the agreements. There's lots of ways that we may react passive aggressively. We will exaggerate. You always do that, or you never do that. Um, and, as I speak about this, you may recognize these patterns, and that at one time we cultivated these protective mechanisms of trying to control the other person. And what we have to realize is that they're not really supporting us, they're not really working with us and for us. And anyway, I have a whole list of them. If you go to my website at hleeshapiro.com, you can see that list of all the things that we do to try to control the other person.
Right.
Another thing we'll do is we'll shut down and not connect with our own feelings, and that's rather than controlling. Or we go into resistance. They say black, we say white, or we go into compliance, and compliance is where it's like the belief there is I'll make your needs more important than my needs if you don't get angry with me or if you don't leave me. So what's interesting is when couples realize the cost of doing those behaviors and they make an agreement with each other that if I start doing that behavior, I give you permission to call me on it. And my intention is to not do that. My intention is to find a way where instead of trying to protect myself, I can move into the intention to learn, to heal, to connect, to love. And with that intention, we can have an exploration with the other person, which is a wonderful experience where we're both exploring, I'm really curious about what's happening for you. And I also notice it's touching off feelings for me. And I'd like to explore my feelings of what's happening here. And when we're both doing that, we're in partnership to bring healing to those parts of ourselves. And that can be a very wonderful experience to do that with a partner,
Oh,
because
certainly.
you're on the same page. Excuse me, your
That's
goal is
fine.
to connect with that other person to learn, really
Hmm.
curious. I'm sure there's a good reason why you're doing what you're doing. And I'd like to learn more about that.
Hmm.
So that becomes fascinating.
Absolutely. I'm hearing, of course, a lot of emotional maturity that might be necessary in order to get to these places where you could have this really intimate moment with your partner, where you
Right.
might be able to say, "Hey, wait a minute, we're arguing about the coats, but I'm feeling an emotion here, and I'd like to explore that with you." Now, I'm
Yes.
curiously, what if there is a partner that is, they have done those things. They've read your book. They said, "Hey, okay, you know what? I'm not gonna react in a controlling manner. I'm going to tend to my own emotions. I'm going to go through the
Mhm.
childhood work that's necessary, etc." And then you've got
Yes.
one partner who's not looking at those things, who doesn't have emotional awareness or maturity. What do you
Right.
say then?
Well, one thing that may happen is checking in with what their intention is. And what
Right?
is your deepest intention now? What is it you're wanting? And what's I'd like to say, what is the sweetest possibility of what we could have here? And
Okay.
and so sometimes it's that, and sometimes it's working through the feelings in a successful way. So sometimes we need to take a time out. So if we find ourselves in a power struggle, it's where my fear is meeting their fear, and we may have an agreement that, rather than unleashing our wounded children into the sandbox to throw sand at each other, how can we find a way? So let's take a time out. And when we take a time out, I like to set that this does not mean you're screwed up and I'm out of here and I'm abandoning you. What this means is that I'm not in my center right now. I'm wanting to control you right now. So, let's take a break and we can explore what's going on. And we can also find methods of getting to a clearer place. So when we come back together, we have a different headspace and we're in a different intention. So, I think a timeout is really important. And then when we do come together, we may, or sometimes we can work through our energies together cooperatively. Like one thing that I like to do is it's called gibberish, where someone one of the partners says, "Let's do gibberish." And gibberish is where we stand and face each other and we let all of our feelings out, but no words, because words get us locked into the story, but more of just moving the energy of our feelings. Where sometimes just breathing together can help out. But it's owning right now, I'm in I'm in a fearful place, or I'm wanting to control you. I'm not in a good place, and I need to move that energy. Sometimes I'll say, can you hold for me? I'm throwing a lot at you right now. But
No,
another
it's good.
technique is when my wife says to me, can you hold for me? I know that it's my job to listen, to get with her, to listen to what she's saying and what's underneath what she's saying, and not to go into resistance, not to take it personally. I don't have to defend myself. I just need to get with her. You know, I remember one time there was a previous girlfriend, and she was speaking, and she said, "I don't feel like you're hearing me." Now I knew I could have repeated word for word everything she just said, but then I stopped and looked at it and I realized, and I said, I think what you're saying is you're not feeling me with you. And the truth is that I have this thought that you're blaming me. And when I feel blamed, boy, this armor comes up over my heart and it's not allowing me to be with you. And I want to get to a place that I can be with you. And I need to work on that so I can really get with you. When we're with the other person, when they feel truly heard, it just sort of can energetically just kind of release a lot of that energy, you know.
Mhm.
So I love the technique of asking for the other person to hold for me, you know.
Yeah.
And another thing we may do is that my wife and I may say, let's do a process that Harville Hendricks developed, who's a relationship coach and that has written many books. And so what we'll do in that case is that one person will speak and the other person will just totally get with whoever's speaking and then just one little piece of information at a time, not the whole ball of wax. And then they'll hear that and they'll repeat what they're hearing the other person is saying, or in active listening, they may also say, I feel like you're angry or you're upset and this is what's happening. And then the other person can say, yes, that's it, or that's not quite it, and they can say, say it so that the other person finally gets it. So that first person may take 5 minutes and go through, and then, and the other person may check in and say, is there anything more? And they may say, well, there is a little bit more. And so they'll go through all of theirs and then they'll switch roles and the other person can check out and make sure that they're being heard and understood. Because a lot of times
Oh,
we're not really hearing each other. We often hear through the filter of our own fears.
mhm.
And so we don't hear the other person. And so when they can say, yes, that's it, and feel heard, it's just like it's a big release. A lot of times when people are in arguments, they're not really hearing each other. They're not really,
It's true.
and that just keeps the conflict going.
Hmm. Hmm.
So those are,
Absolutely. If I witness any arguments that I've ever seen outside of TV, of course, because in TV you say this big moment, you mic drop, and the other person finally understands, you know.
yes.
And so everybody thinks that's what they should do in arguments. They should
Yeah,
they should say this big, profound, loud, angry moment, and the other person will finally understand. And the fact of the matter is it's not that way.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Yeah.
anytime I've ever seen arguments, it's usually two people who have a lot of wounding within themselves that they would like to speak about, but that they
Yes.
can't quite articulate, perhaps maybe because they don't have quite the maturity, sorry, emotional maturity around that quite yet, or maybe they've not done the self-exploration around that. And then it ends up that they're saying the same thing, but almost in like a cat and mouse sort of way.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. 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 Yeah. So it's noticing, the way we can change behaviors is first recognizing that what we're doing is not really working for us. And then finding a way that does work and then practicing over and over. And God knows we're human, we're going to make mistakes. And so a big part of it is learning to accept those mistakes that we've made and owning our part with it that we haven't done well. For me to be able to say, I really don't like the way I did that, and I'd like to, what I wish I could have, if I were to say it right now, this is how I would have liked to have said that. And we can say it with I statements, taking personal responsibility for what's ours. One thing that helps me a lot is knowing that if I have a problem with what someone else is doing, where's the problem? It's not out there. They're just doing what they're doing. The problem is that I'm interpreting it as a problem. I'm calling it a problem. That's where the problem is, or it's touching off feelings for me that I don't want to feel. So I call it a problem. And so if I can own where that is and see where my work is, rather than trying to manipulate them, that's a huge, huge step. And so, uh, and then dealing with, one thing that we like to do is a do-over. And a do-over is where we realize that I don't like the way I've handled that. And, I just, you know, said something that was diminishing them in some way. And I realized that was not helpful at all. Ultimately, it was a control mechanism. And so when I can say, let's do it over again. So, for example, a story I like to
Wow.
tell about that many years ago, oh, this was about 35 years ago, and my wife had crashed the car. And boy, I was hooked in. And she came home and she knocked. I came home. I knocked on the door, and she opened the door. She said, "I crashed the car," and I said in a very angry tone, "Where did it happen?" She said, "Out in front of the condo." Then I said, a very parent to child controlling question. I said, um, "Didn't I tell you to watch out for that spot?" That's the way a parent talks to a child. And she says, "Yeah." And then I asked a question that was not the intention to learn, it was the intention to intimidate. And I said, "Why can't you be more careful?" And then she felt bad and I felt bad. And I recognized that I felt bad. And I said, "This doesn't feel good. Can we do this over again?" And she lit up. She said, "Yeah, let's do it over again." And I walked outside the door. I knocked on the door. She opened the door. She said, "I crashed the car." I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I'm fine." I said, "Well, that's all that really matters." And I looked at her. I said, "Would you like a hug right now?" She said, "I would love a hug." And I gave her a big hug, and we both got to feel good about doing it over again.
Wow.
So,
Wow. That is a
yeah.
really special story. Like even I'm listening, I'm like, oh, that's so nice. Because that is that, and what an excellent opportunity to do something that is a little bit more fun loving, a little bit lighter, and yet
Yes.
still achieves the ultimate goal of saying, hey, wait a minute, what I said was harmful, and I really want to do this better.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And those, we're multidimensional, and there's a part of us that learned from an early age how to dominate and intimidate. And sometimes we go without, just our reaction is to go to one of those behaviors and to recognize when we're doing that. And it's like, and as we practice this more and more, we become more self-aware and realize, this is not feeling really good for me. So,
Hmm.
and we've kind of, my wife and I have a shorthand way of dealing with that, where if I say something that doesn't feel good to her, she'll say, "Ouch." And then I'll say, "Oops." And oops
Yeah.
means it's not my intention to hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry, you know,
Yeah.
and, uh, and it just gets cleaned up very quickly. And it's like gets us back to our truest intention, which is wanting to connect, wanting to be in love, wanting to get our needs met in a way that we can all win. And so, that works really well.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Lee, I'm listening and I'm thinking, wow, what an extraordinary relationship these two must have. And the work that must have been put in by both of you to get
Uh-huh.
to the place where that you're at. And so I just want to like take a moment to honor that and just say,
Thank you.
well done there, with yourself and your wife. And then I also, I consider and I think about the listeners who are doing the same thing that, perhaps I might be prodding about, which is kind of like, well, but what if only one partner is willing to do the
Right,
work,
right,
And what I'm hearing, what I'm recognizing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that, is that the if only one partner were to do the work, I do think that, perhaps there's a little bit more resilience that is necessary there, especially in those moments where one person's just kind of spiraling and the other person has the cognition and awareness,
okay.
to make the smarter choices that are harder. There's no question.
Uh-huh.
Um, but that perhaps that if that person models that behavior long enough, then the other partner has an opportunity to either rise to the occasion or crumble under the pressure. What are your
Right.
thoughts on that?
Uh, well, sometimes it gets into uh, doing what we can do and recognizing, that there does come to be a certain point where we have to recognize that I'm not willing to be abused. And so I think
Fine.
having appropriate boundaries is very helpful in knowing how to set those boundaries. And, if there's a continual pattern of abuse, of physical or emotional abuse in some way, then, it may be appropriate to take some space, take a long time out or whatever, say, I'm not available for that,
Right.
and
Hmm.
so sometimes that, I think of the Starship Enterprise that, from Star Trek
Oh,
that,
yes. Yeah.
and, the Enterprise has shields. And if the Enterprise is interacting with the Klingons and the Klingons are hurling photon torpedoes at the Enterprise and our shields are damaged, which translates to our own wounds inside from
Hmm.
way back. And if our shields
Hmm.
are damaged and we're actually vulnerable to getting annihilated, it's a really good idea to get out of there and go back to Starbase and get our shields repaired. And so, so
Love that.
sometimes, yeah, so sometimes we need to set a boundary, but in the meantime, notice that this is a wound for me, and then working with a therapist or supportive friends or our own exploration of exploring what's underneath that. How is this touching off a part of my own shadow? Where is my pain coming from, and how do I work with that in a way that's truly healing? And sometimes it means there's some techniques also that I like to use of talking to, if you will, our child inside, and rather than the inner critic that, gets into diminishing us, of, seeing the loving part of ourselves and finding those techniques that bring me into a clear state of consciousness. So, I mentioned that our first step is about maybe with letting the feelings flow and really energetically working with the feelings. But after that, there's a lot of things that we can do that help bring us into a clear state of consciousness, such as um, because, as I mentioned, we communicate more with our intention and our energy. So when I can, come into changing the ground of being of where I'm coming from and come into my own power and clarity and connectedness, if you will, then, and so for all of us, it's finding what are those things that bring me into connection. It might be taking a walk in the forest. It may be talking to wise and supportive friends or a therapist, or it might be saying empowering affirmations, or it might be, playing with a puppy or a pet, uh, or it may be going to humor, or sometimes I'll watch teachers on YouTube like Eckhart Tolle or whatever
Mm,
teachers that are that and the frequency of their information or in certain books too that 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 penetrates for me and brings me into a state of peace. Um,
mm.
anyway, also on my website, there's a whole list of a smorgasbord of different activities that we can do, being
Okay.
creative, doing painting or some creative activity, or you know, um, just remembering a time of mastery. When years ago I was a ski when I was doing some ski racing in Aspen, one of the fellow racers said to me, when you're on the chairlift, think of a time when you felt mastery in your life. So I would think about when I was painting and the paintings, I was in the zone and it was just flowing and it felt really good. And my skiing actually got better because as I recalled that experience of mastery, my body took on that frequency and I was there doing my best. And so what does it take to bring us into that zone, And so it can be a memory of just an activity that we loved or a time that I felt peaceful or something like that so recalling these memories, it's really interesting how the body can go into a clearer state of consciousness through that. So,
Hmm.
and then when I'm in that state, it's amazing the creative wisdom that can come through me that, of how to deal with this situation in a really wise way that works really well. So how can, sometimes it's that question is how do I if I'm not in a clear state and I can use all these techniques, but if underneath it I'm still trying to control them, they're going to pick up on that energy. So
Right.
I have to really get that cleaned up for myself if I can really do that well. And it's amazing what we can do as we've worked with our, part of that is working with our shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we were taught is unlovable. And as I
Mhm.
worked with accepting that part of myself, that it's just a part of me. It's not all that I am. And, uh, like one time many years ago, I was with a girlfriend and we were in Kauai where the prices are very exorbitant in my mind. And I was
Fun.
trying to find a less expensive restaurant. And that touched off something for her, and she said a shaming remark. She said, "Lee, you are so cheap." And and I said, "Yeah, it's true. I'm absolutely in scarcity consciousness right now, and I would just like to ask your support in my learning to accept that part of myself and not trying to shame it away into oblivion." And so I couldn't
I
argue. It was
love that.
totally true. That
Yeah,
I was in fear, and but years ago, if someone said I was cheap, it was like, oh yeah, well, I'm paying for you, or oh yeah, well, it's some kind of a
fine.
uh,
Deflect.
re deflection, yeah. And so I was like, yeah, yeah, that's happening. I get that. Thanks, thanks for pointing
Wow.
that out. I don't really want to be that one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then following it up by saying, okay, yeah, you have a point, but in this moment I need your support is just so cool. Like
Yeah,
what a powerful way to I don't want to say mic drop because that's not the intention, but to say, I hear what you're saying. I've recognized your kind of shaming comment, and and I actually, yeah, yeah, I'm with you, but I could use some support in this way.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Putting out straight requests is another really important thing. A lot of times we have a part of us that thinks if I don't shame them, I'm not going to get my needs met. So instead of saying, you lazy bum, you never take out the garbage, it might be, I have a request. Would you be willing to take the garbage out on Wednesdays? And it would really mean a lot to me. It's far more likely that you're going to get whoever the other person to take the garbage out if you put it a straight way and, like
Hmm.
that, rather than trying to shame them or having that other energy in it. It's just a
Yeah.
straight request. And the difference between a request and a demand is that a demand has a fear within us that if they don't do what I'm asking, that I'm going to suffer. So then there's fear in it. And a request, that's a demand. A request is where I'm pretty neutral about it. That if they don't do it, I can get my needs met anyway. So, there's not all that fear energy that's, or anger energy that's underneath it. Fear is always
Right.
under anger.
Yes,
Yeah,
certainly. Certainly.
yeah.
Well, this has just been so enlightening. I'm really grateful for all of the tips and tricks that you've given us and being so patient with all of my prodding as well, you know.
I love
And
it.
good, good. Yes, yes, absolutely. I'm sure that your seminars are just wildly fascinating to have the crowd interact and connect with you and challenge you. And it sounds to me like you're really on your toes and you're able to answer back really eloquently.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to, and sometimes when conflict comes up and, it really can be challenging. How do I deal with uh, what's going on in the world, and the
Hmm.
conflict that I feel there? And,
Hmm.
how do I best stand up for my needs? Or when I see that things are unfair, how do I do that in an effective way? So this applies to social issues as well, and
Absolutely.
um, there was Rennie Davis was, I don't know if any of you saw the movie about the Chicago 7 trials. It was on Netflix. But during
No.
the anti-war movement of the 60s, there was a trial where a man named Rennie Davis was part of this was, uh, there was a demonstration at the Democratic National Convention in 1968. And Rennie, I think through his connection with um, uh, oh, just Maharaji and some other teachers, that he became aware that the war in Vietnam specifically, was that war was a symptom of fear. And when the anti-war demonstrators were coming with a frequency of fear, they were actually feeding the very energy that created the war in the first place. And
Mm.
that in that resistance, they also alienated and polarized with the Middle America and the lifestyle of Middle America, and in doing so, alienated an important contingency that was necessary to get out of Vietnam. And so he realized that he needed to shift the energy with which he came at the energy with that issue, and not, when we can try to see what is the other side, what is it they're really wanting personally, and what is it they're trying to get, and we see what their needs are, and how do we approach that in a way where we don't see them as the enemy, but we see them as a fellow
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, very much so. Lee, I'm
aggressor,
losing you a little
is a
bit
fellow
on your
human being who's
internet
wounded.
connection.
And as we help, oh, I'm seeing that too. Uh, I'm
Uh,
not quite sure what I can do about
no trouble.
that.
No trouble. That's just fine. You know what I'm thinking is that perhaps it might be the right thing to do is to begin to wrap up, and then we can I can do any editing around that space.
There with me?
Yep, there we are. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to say again an important statement, and that is that as we cultivate a feeling inside of feeling safe and knowing we can take care of our needs, that that opens us to the luxury of compassion.
Mm.
Okay.
A very important statement. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes.
and really a core value and a core lesson when it comes to your work.
Yes.
Really beautiful. Okay, so if anyone that wants to find your book or your website, I'll connect
Right.
all of those things there, and it is available through Amazon. Yeah,
Amazon. Amazon. Uh-huh.
good, good.
Yes.
That'll be great. That'll be probably easiest for our Canadian friends.
Great.
Excellent. Perfect. Well, just thank you so much for being on the podcast today and for sharing all of your knowledge and your wisdom. Just deeply grateful for your time and this great smile that you've got here and telling stories about your wife and your life and sharing your vulnerability there and sharing your tips and tricks with us.
Thank you.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure.
Have a beautiful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.